Hi, welcome to the Temple Institute again. We are now officially in Chodesh Elul, the month of tshuva, the month of us coming back to God, looking at what we've done through the year and try and repent for the sins before the holy day of Rosh Hashanah comes. We certainly want to do introspection, and it's an important month for everybody. One of the things I want to talk about today is a continuation and the last year for now on korbanot and the various attempts throughout the centuries to actually bring korbanot on the Temple Mount. Before we start, I want to throw out a riddle to you, and perhaps you can answer the riddle below on the YouTube, or next time I will give the answer to the riddle next time I speak. And the riddle goes like this. Where in the Temple Mount, on the Temple Mount, where in the Mikdash, in the temple, was a mezuzah placed? Where did they need to put a mezuzah? And I'll let you guys think about that. Anybody who gets the answer will get 3 stars from me. I don't know how I'll get them to you, but I'll try to send 3 stars to you, 3 gold stars. Let's start. So different attempts to bring korbanot on the Temple Mount. And then you ask yourself, wait a second, there's no temple, how can I bring the offerings? How can I bring the korbanot? And that's an excellent question. And the answer to that is a Mishnah. A Mishnah in Edyot. Edyot is in the Nezikin section of the Mishnayot. Edyot is essentially testimonies that different rabbis brought about various halachot. Many of them have to do with tumatara, with being ritually clean or unclean. And this particular one has to do with korbanot. And it appears in Tractate Edyot, the 8th parak, the 8th chapter. And yes, Amar Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua was one of the great Tanaim, and Rabbi Yeshua was a Levi too. He was a Levite. And he said, Shamati, Shemakrivin afal pi she'en bayit. This halacha I heard, what it means I heard, it was a mesar, it was a tradition. I heard this from my rabbim, that you can bring offerings on Har HaBayit. You can bring the offerings on the Mizbeach on Har HaBayit, even if there's no Beit HaMikdash. That's a landmark halacha. And that's an important halacha, because it opens the gateways for us to now go bring korbanot even today without a Mikdash built on the Temple Mount. And let me go through this. The Rambam, in his laws of Beit HaBechira, of the Beit HaMikdash, in the 6th parak and the 15th halacha, he actually brings this down as halacha, as the law that we have to abide by. Lefikach makrivin hakorbanot kulan. Therefore, we can bring all the korbanot. Notice the word all, kulan. It's a big word there because not everybody follows that kulan, as we'll see in a second. Even though there's no house, the house of God is not built there, but you can still bring offerings, you can still bring korbanot, kulan, all of them, on the Mizbeach, on the altar. Certainly we have to build an altar there. That's, I think, pretty clear, but that wouldn't be very hard. Rav Ariel has said that it would take him a couple hours to get the Mizbeach onto Har HaBayit because the altar has already been built and is sitting in the one, there's 2 altars actually. There's the big one sitting in some storage out near the Dead Sea, and there's the smaller one that's sitting in the Tarucha, the display of Mechon Mikdash of the Temple Institute in the Old City. You can move that Mizbeach, put it on the Temple Mount, and we'd be good to go, hopefully within a couple hours. Perhaps it would take a day for the outside cement to dry, but for the most part, we'd be ready to go very quickly. Now, there were attempts throughout the ages to actually bring korbanot on the Temple Mount. There's actually different Gemaras that seem to indicate after the destruction of the Second Temple, within that 50-year period, there were still attempts to bring korbanot on the Temple Mount. Various people, such as the great Maritz Chayot, who was a great commentator from Europe in the 1800s, he has a whole piece on this in terms of bringing in the Second Temple, post-Second Temple period, that they brought offerings on the Mizbeach. Rav Yaakov Emden, a great scholar from the 1700s, shares that idea as well. But I want to focus on a later period. I want to focus on the period starting already in the 1200s, in medieval times. The Balei Tosfot, who were the students, as we once said, explained, they were the students of Rashi, Rav Shlomo Yitzchaki, who was one of the greatest commentators on both the Bible and the Talmud. And these students, because it was so bad in France in their time, they decided that they needed to leave. A lot of bad things were happening. A lot of pogroms were happening. A lot of Jews were getting killed. They had just burned the Talmud, and they needed to get out of there. And they decided they were going to move to Israel. And one of these great scholars was named Rabbi Chilmi Paris. He was from Paris. One of the greatest of the, actually Bali Tosfot, one of the greatest of the students of Rashi. And this Rabbi Chilmi Paris, one of the things he wanted to do was bring korbanot, bring offerings on the Temple Mount. Pretty crazy. Imagine how many Jews were living there. Maybe a few thousand total were in all of Israel. It was undeveloped, the whole place. There are obviously here and there all kinds of different people roaming around Israel, but there weren't a lot of people living there at that period of time. And yet with their small amount of people, Rabbi Chilmi Paris, one of the great Balei Tosfot, wanted to bring korbanot. 100 years later, there was another individual who came to Israel. He also was a French Jew, and his name was Rabbi Ishturi HaParchi. Rabbi Ishturi HaParchi, they say that wasn't his real name, because it's a weird name, it's a strange name. The word Ishturi is from two words, Ishtori, a man who is searching, a man who is like Meragel, like the Meraglim were Torim Be'eretz Yisrael. They came to spy on the land. So he was a man who was both spying and searching, and he came to Israel to search, to understand the boundaries, the halachic boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. What is the halachic boundaries for certain mitzvot that apply only, certain commandments that only apply to Eretz Yisrael? And they say that he actually circled Israel 7 times to see what each part of Eretz Yisrael was. And he lived in the end in Beit Shan, area that's actually quite hot. It's the hottest part in Israel, and I don't suggest going there during the summer because it's just really hot. However, Rabbi Ishturi HaParchi also discussed bringing korbanot, bringing offerings on Har Bayit, on the Temple Mount. And one of the issues he had was with this idea of bringing korbanot, and he was discussing it with his rabbi. He talks about this in a book he wrote. And the book is called Kaftar V'Ferach. That's the name of the book. Kaftar V'Ferach are the two words. Kaftar is like a knob, and Ferach is a flower, and it comes from the menorah. If you look at in the Bible, when it discusses how the menorah looked, so it talks about it, and it had it Kaftarim Uprachim. So that's where the words Kaftar V'Ferach come from. And Rabbi Ishturi HaParchi, he was discussing with his rabbi, but he had a problem. And the problem he had was, everyone is ritually impure. We're all tame. How can we bring korbanot if we're all tame? And here's the next halacha that's so important. And this halacha is called Tuma Hutra B'tzibur. He said he remembered while traveling of this halacha in the Gemara, which says, and the Maimonides brings it down as halacha as well. And it's Tuma Hutra B'tzibur. Tuma, when everyone is tame, everyone is ritually impure, unclean. Hutra b'tzibor. It's mutar when there's a tzibor, when everyone has it. Which means is that you can actually bring korbanot even betuma, even when you're tame, you can bring korbanot on Har Bayit if everyone is tame. It's only when just a small, minute group of people are tame is that when it's asur, it's prohibited for them to be on the Temple Mount. But if everyone is tame, it's actually mutar. And we learned this halacha actually by the korban pesach, the Passover offering. And this was what most of the great rabbis discussed about bringing the korban pesach, because it was the easiest thing to bring actually. It had the least problems in terms of bringing it on the Temple Mount. And this was actually the main korban. Even though the Rambam, we said before, said kulan, all of them, but most of the rabbis felt that the korban pesach, at least let's start with that one. And let's see if we can bring it. Now, if we fast forward a little bit to around the 1700s, 1800s, so we're moving from around the 1300s to the 1800s, with Napoleon having taken over the world became somewhat globalized. And the idea of, by many rabbis started to entertain the idea of building the Mikdash. And a lot of writings actually emerged at that point, talking about the Mikdash. And I'll name a couple. Rav Yaakov Emden, the Malbim, Rav Maritz Chayut, and one of the most famous ones is Rav Tzvi Kalisher. Rav Tzvi Kalisher was a student of the great of the great Rabbi Akiva Eger. Rabbi Akiva Eger was known as one of the greatest minds of the time. This is in the 1700s, moving into the 1800s. But Tzvi Kalisher was his student. As they say in Hebrew, his Talmud Muvak. He was his, would say, top student of Rabbi Akiva Eger. And Tzvi Kalisher, based on his studies, he understood that we have to all go to Eretz Yisrael. We all have to move here. And we also have to build a Mikdash. And he actually wrote a book called Drishat Zion, which is all about that. In the book Drishat Zion, he has all his letters that he corresponds with his rabbi, Rabbi Akiva Eger, and he convinces Rabbi Akiva Eger that we actually have to bring korbanot today. We have to bring offerings today on Har HaBayit. Now, Rabbi Akiva Eger had a son-in-law, and his name was called the Chatam Sofer. Also, one of the great commentators, wrote tremendous amount of responsa, very important responsa, and was a well-known great rabbi of the time. Rabbi Akiva Eger asks his son-in-law, the Chatam Sofer. In Ashkenazis, we say Chassam Sofer. He said to his son-in-law, the Chassam Sofer, go check out if we can actually go bring a korban pesach on the Temple Mount. And they were living in Europe at the time. They weren't living in Israel. But he still needed to know. Rabbi Akiva Eger needed to know. And so the Chassam Sofer goes ahead and he tries to clarify if there's a possibility for them to bring a korban pesach on the Temple Mount. Now think about this. There was nothing in Israel. They didn't even know about the sizes of the Temple Mount exactly, but they saw that there was a possibility for them to go bring korbanot there, and nothing deterred them. Nothing bothered them. They didn't say, oh, this is not the right place, this is not the right area. They thought if they have the possibility to bring it, they're going to bring it. And what happened was, in the end, they couldn't. And in one of the responses, the Chatam Sofer explains what happened. And he says like this, Yikrat Kodsho Higiani, the honor of His Holiness, he's referring to his father-in-law, has reached me in terms of your request. Levakesh misarei Yerushalayim, you asked me to ask the princes of Jerusalem, Litein Rishut Lakriv, to go and bring a korban pesach. Do you give us permission to bring this korban pesach? But here's the problem, is the rulers of Jerusalem at the time were Muslims. And it says, Hu Kaptan Gadol. He's a very strict guy, the guy who rules, the Muslim who rules there in Jerusalem. And he said like this, Bal Yikarev Sham Mi She'enu Me'emunat Yishmael. The only people allowed on the Temple Mount are only people that believe in the religion of Ishmael, which is Islam. Okay? And because of that, they couldn't go up to Har HaBayit. They had no ability, no chance to actually bring that korban pesach. And that's actually an important point. And the reason it's an important point is because a lot of people, the claim against the people who go up to Har HaBayit, the Temple Mount activists that go up to Har HaBayit, their claim is, well, the Jews never went up in those days either. In the 1700s, Jews didn't go up to Har HaBayit. In the 1800s, they didn't go up to Har HaBayit. But I think this tshuva, this responsa by the Chatam Sofer, tells it all. They didn't go up because they couldn't. The Muslims did not allow non-Muslim believers to go up to Har HaBayit. I hope Jared Kushner, by the way, is listening. Now, another attempt very recently, not today, but pre-Medina, pre the establishment of the State of Israel, there was another attempt actually to bring the Korban Pesach. And that attempt was by a Rav Yaakov Moshe Charlap. We know him as a Rav Charlap. Rav Charlap was a Talmud Chaver, they say. He was a student, but also a friend of Rav Avram Yitzchak Cohen Cook, who was one of the great scholars of pre-state Israel. And he actually penned a lot of the, call it religious Zionistic Torah, for lack of a better word. Rav Charlap was also the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the yeshiva of Merkaz Harav, and served as the Rosh Yeshiva for many years. Now, Rav Charlap, in 1927, he turned to the British mandate. The British mandate at the time was ruling Israel. And he said like this, he wanted to get reshut, he wanted to get permission from the mandate, the British mandate, to bring a Korban Pesach. Guess what happened? What happened was the Arabs didn't like that. They were scared. And so they told the British that if you do this, we're going to have riots. So the British said to themselves, we don't need riots, so you can't bring this korban pesach. But I think what it shows you is these attempts were real attempts by great, great rabbis. Something that most people were not exposed to. And if I may share with you something really interesting. Rabbi Shah Ariel, 15 years ago, was interviewed in a paper in Israel called Basheva. His interview was actually about these issues, that throughout the centuries, Jews have always attempted to bring korbanot, to bring the offerings. They've always failed for various reasons. It was that article, though, that spurred me on to learning more about the Mikdash. It was actually these ideas of these attempts that I had no idea about. I was ignorant in these ideas. But when I learned about these ideas, it awakened in me something, a spirit, a new spirit for me, to attempt to understand all the halachot, all the laws of the Mikdash, and to become a part of this amazing group of people, the Temple Mounts, activists, and the people who want to build the temple and are spending their time now to build the temple. And I love every one of you to join us. And when you're in Israel, we'll all go up together to the Temple Mount and figure out how to build the next Mikdash, the next temple. Thank you very much.